Today, we want to talk a little bit about men's mental health and maybe dispel some misconceptions about it. And so I want to just present to you guys, the experts here, 5 misconceptions I believe are misconceptions about men's mental health. The first one that I want first to talk about is the notion that men are impervious to emotional duress because they're strong. And we kind of get this from the superheroes that we've seen on TV and in movies for so long because they're physically strong. They are literally blocking the physical threats, but they also seem to be impervious to the emotional threats. And I think we've come to idealize these characters and aspire to be these characters. How has pop culture in general, I've talked a little bit about movies, but there are also other influences. How has this misconception come about, and what can we do about it?
I was gonna say, I think one of the things for me, being a millennial here, I think one of the things that is happening in culture now with a lot of our movies, I think that narrative is changing, but I think how it's been ingrained in our society for so long. Like even for me, being born in 1990, I know growing up with my dad, it was like, we don't cry about those things. We man up, toughen up, and do all those things, all those kind of negative connotations with growing up instead of being able to express those emotions. So I think it's something that's been ingrained in our society for a long time, and just even with media growing up and just different things where you see men in certain commercials, or you see when it comes to even medication, you don't see men in those commercials. You see a lot of you see a lot of women in those commercials. You don't see men in those. So it's just kind of something that's just been in our society for a long time.
And so you were born in 90 and you still were raised with this concept that men are impervious to. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Kind of old school culture that's in my family. So it's like a lot of things that, my dad and his family had, just the same thing, just kind of growing up the same way. So.
Which is fascinating because it's the same in the immigrant and Hispanic community across the board. You saw it from my perspective, basically learning English from television. And you had takeaways from TV shows in the 1980s that were, Miami Vice and these very A-Team and these very stoic people that solved problems. And you're like, okay, that is who my hero is supposed to be or what it's supposed to look like. And then when you turn to your own father or people that are involved in your family, and that's not how it works, or they kind of mirror that, but yet you don't really kind of how did you become that person and dealing with these kind of issues that we all know we all deal with day in, day out.
That's interesting. So you were being educated in language and then indirectly being educated about how to handle emotional duress.
Absolutely. You were constantly, that resiliency piece that we all strive for and in everything in life. You look at family as, or at least your earliest mentors, your parents, as those that will teach you how to deal with that stress and what is coming. It's not so much that you want them to bulldoze everything down for you, it's just how to manage that, because there's so many things in life that you have to deal with, that anxiety and stress, and what does that look like? And for me, I had a mother who had a mental breakdown, who suffered from severe depression and severe anxiety. So not having her as a resource and looking for that resilience piece is like, well, I turned to my father. Well, he was not around much because he was looking for ways to provide for the family. So now if you are looking for ways to survive outside of the way some deal with it and cope with it, narcotics, other means of outward expression that is not necessarily healthy, if you're lucky enough to have the right kind of people to come into your life, then it guides you into that. If you look at a ladder, it that next step, and then obviously they hand you off to that next person. But internally within our house, we didn't talk about this stuff, and it was a lot of it was the people weren't equipped, and they were also taught by generational, just dealing with not talking about it, that this is how it's dealt with.
Yeah.
So how much of this is, we're in America, American context, but then you talk about immigrant context. How much of it is generational? How much of it is cultural? How much of it is thank you, Marvel and DC, because you all did this to us? Like, where does this start and end? Is it an American thing? Is this a worldwide thing? Is it a gender thing? Like, you're like, hey, millennial, I got it. and you're immigrant. I got it. And I'm like, well, I probably roughly your age, but was born and raised here, and I got it. So like, where did we catch it?
I want to say in the African American community, it's one of those things. A lot of times they tell us to pray about it and go to church. And I just actually read a study that a lot of young men now, they, instead of going to a mental health therapist, they're going to talk to their pastors. And so that's something that's ingrained in our community, being very spiritual and not talking to people we don't trust per se, because that was one of the things that was ingrained in me. Whenever my mom would send us to school, it would be one of those things like, hey, if somebody asks you questions, what happens in the house stays in the house. And it wasn't anything traumatic, but it was like, this is your house. We don't trust people that's not within our circle. And then when you brought up A-Team and things like that, I spent the summers at my grandma's house. So I remember watching A-Team and then like, the Terminator grown-up movies that I probably shouldn't be watching when I was in the 90s, but it was like, you sneak and watch those things. But I always think of like John Wayne, because a lot of people outside of the United States, like when they come to America, they're like, oh, John Wayne was my first impression of how to be a man in America. It's like all these older movies and things like that. But I think, again, that's just something that was just ingrained in us. It was just kind of like the Marlboro Man. It's like the Western Cowboys, all these things.
So I have this perception that over the last, people growing up, really millennials, that they also had layered on, and tell me if this is accurate or not, layered on this sort of like, but also young men should be tamed and should be more sensitive and open. And it feels like there is that almost battling pressure or expectation to be more in touch with your feelings, to be a little bit, smoother and not as rough around the edges. And number one is that accurate? Has that been a pressure in a script? And if so, has it felt like battling or conflicting messages to man up and also be tame and stayed and be more, in touch with your feelings?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I got the, if you can call it the best of both worlds. I got the best of both worlds of being, like you said, kind of the millennial and seeing how things are. We're told to talk about our feelings. And I have a daughter now, so it's like I have to be able to express that sensitive side. But then there's also that part of me that's still that quiet, like rugged individual where it's like, I got to take care of the house. I got to take care of these things. So those things are still naturally ingrained in me. But you have to be able to talk about those things and be able to get those things out, especially when, you're dealing with, when you move up, for me, if you move more up the corporate ladder, as a man in a leadership role, you're not supposed to talk about things. You're not supposed to show emotions. You're supposed to be stoic whenever you're in a meeting, not showing the emotions. But now, for me, it's like sometimes I'm able to show those emotions and not being judged for that, because that's for where a lot of men, we are judged, and that's why we don't, show our emotions, different things like that. But it's still at the same time, it's the other side of it where in certain times I'm like, I just sit back and don't show any emotion and be emotionless. Or even if I'm at home, interacting with my daughter, it's still like those times where I have to break down that barrier. Like, okay, I have to show this sensitive side of her. I just can't be this macho man or this guy outside of the house for that. So
you got to, and raising two middle school teenagers, one boy, one girl, 14 and soon to be 13-year-old girl. So it's covering both grounds, right? Developing both of them, but then also being a good representation of who you'd want them to be when they're no longer a part of your life and they've chosen another. It's often said, the individual that your daughter is going to end up with is going to mirror a lot of what you have represented in their upbringing. So you're like, that's a lot of pressure. I gotta make sure that I step up. But then on the boy side, how do I create that strength? Researcher Richard Reeves talks about looking for someone who will be quick to respond to a shipwreck and like being the one that's going to be the one that goes and helps people, but then also adequate to go and dance with. So this like, okay.
No pressure on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's, to your point, Adam, where do we build that resiliency in our youth, but also understand that there's a time and a place to be open and vulnerable, and then be able to see that from a strength perspective, not a weakness, that you can be vulnerable with the people that need you to be vulnerable, to show them what does that look like.
So I went to school to become a psychologist in the aughts, And then we do these diversity seminars. And I always go back, you talk about misconceptions. I'm like, how much of that was told to me is true, formally told to me, still holds? And one of the questions I have, like, we did a whole diversity seminar on machismo and how much that is a Latino, Hispanic pressure and expectation on men. Number one, misconception or true, and either way, what impact is that have on the discussion about men's mental health?
Huge,
now.
huge, and it's very true. It's something that
What is it?
So it's just basically the stoicism that you see in a man. Goes to what you were talking about earlier. Not talking about it. We're just going to bury it inside, and we're going to show strength through getting the job done, but never talking about what it took to get there or the hardship that you endured to get to that point. One of the data points that's always stayed with me over the years when I was doing Hispanic outreach at the Tulsa Police Department is that approximately around 70% of the people that come here undocumented into the United States come here with some sort of PTSD trauma from that journey.
What was the percentage?
Almost 70%.
Wow.
And so much of it is undealt with. So they get here, they establish themselves as immigrants and eventually residents, then U.S. citizens. They have children in the U.S. We're not dealing with, this trauma that we dealt with riding the iron beast, that train that so many of our undocumented individuals ride. And then, what does it look like to cross over into the United States border? And I'm talking about historical over our generation, but it's trauma that goes just untapped. And how do we help that so that then when they have their first generation American children, that they're able to somehow process that healthy-wise, and so it doesn't pass it down.
And
to
even if
another
the
child.
trip went perfect in a first-class carriage, it still is traumatic in one sense to completely change countries,
You're
context,
leaving
start
what you've
over.
known. Yeah.
Like I mean, even if it's a completely smooth trip with no trauma, there still is trauma with that transition.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you are taught machismo to bury it and deal with it on your own, whether you're crying by yourself or using some sort of suppression, alcohol, drugs, womanizing, things that, and again, I'm not making generalizations, but I know without my own father, that's how he dealt with things. And he was gone a lot because he had this pressure to provide for my family. So I didn't have that mentorship. I didn't have the, what does it look like to deal with your problems? So whatever that stress is, whether it was academic from an elementary, middle school, high school, and even going on to being the first in your family to go to college, to how to engage with a young lady. What does that look like? So I had to lean on mentors, football coaches, baseball coaches, people in the community, pastors, to show me what does that look like to open a car door for a young lady or a door for someone, the kind of things that you would like to look at your father to show you. But he was too bad still dealing with undealt trauma that he couldn't get past that, and therefore passing it down to me.
And then the script is unclear because there's what I see, and then there's what I feel, and then there's what's happening around me. All those things sort of informing what you should be doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So you're leaning on strangers a lot, mentors that, by the kindness of their heart, that look at you and like, you know what, I see some potential in you. I don't know what it is because you're a juvenile delinquent right now, but there's some potential, and that they guide you into that next step and chapter in your life. And this is how you end up kind of coming out the other end of that impoverished background.